I just wanted to throw out 2 or 3 ideas just generally about the whole notion of citizen journalism as a kind of way of getting things started. Because it strikes me that one of the reasons for the rise in interest and in fact in the idea of citizens journalism over the last, I don't know, decade or so has been clearly Web 2.0, the opportunities of new forms of communication that have been provided by the web and the internet generally. And that's the usual explanation for why this citizens journalism idea has come about, and I think there's truth in that. But I also think it's just as important, if not more important, to say that the reason why this concept has gained ground is because people feel that the media, alongside pretty much all the other mainstream institutions in society, completely fail to represent the experience, the aspirations, the hopes and desires of the vast majority of the population. There's a huge disconnect, a democratic deficit, whereby people feel rightly that the media is more and more nakedly run by either the government in the case of the BBC or the corporations in the case of the rest of it, and that it doesn't serve the interests of ordinary people. And that seems to me to be the fundamental starting point really for citizens journalism. And so there's just 3 kind of implications, there's 3 things that I think flow from that, amongst many more, no doubt. The first is that in terms of my take on citizen journalism, the first principle I think should be that we take sides, that we shouldn't accept the idea of impartiality or the idea of balance or neutrality, because those ideas are actually an illusion, a deception, deliberately deployed to cover, in the case of the mainstream media, essentially a media that represents the interests of the elites. Trotsky actually said about the Times newspaper, the London Times newspaper, back early in the 20th century, he said that the Times tells the truth about the little things in order better to lie about the big things. And I think that's still the case, although maybe it's moved a bit so they don't really even tell the truth about the little things anymore. But essentially that's what we're faced with, and therefore the idea of neutrality, I think, doesn't apply here. Howard Zinn, a popular American historian who died a couple of years ago, put it very, very well, I think, when he argued that we're all participants in history, and therefore the idea that we can stand on the sidelines doesn't make sense. He said, "I start from the supposition that the world is topsy-turvy, that things are all wrong, that the wrong people are in jail and the wrong people are out of jail, that the wrong people are in power and the wrong people are out of power." And that for me is a good starting point for citizen journalism. Point 2, it's not just about the people in this room or the kind of people immediately we know who are writers, filmers, photographers, whatever. That as well as us all thinking about what we can do, I think the project has to be about spreading the net incredibly wide, about creating a situation where we want to access Counterfire to untold numbers of people who can see it as somewhere where they can express their views, make their opinion heard, and record their experiences. One of the things, one of the actual models of citizen journalism that is kind of portrayed in sort of mainstream academia is a South Korean website which was called, which is still going actually. It's called Oh My News, which was a real phenomenon at the beginning of the last decade, where I think they have about 40 journalists and 50,000 volunteer journalists. About 10 to 20% of the content is actually journalist written. The rest is accessed, and it's based on this whole network. Now that's a sort of semi-commercial model, to be honest, but I think we can learn from that, and that's quite interesting. We want to get the views and the opinions of people at the sharp end, of people who have particularly horrific stories about the impact of the cuts. We want to get we want to get whistleblowers to send their reports in, people with particularly shocking stories, people who are organising struggle as well. We want to get all that experience, and if you do get all those different experiences together in one place, what you end up with is a kind of picture, a global picture of oppression, of a system of oppression and exploitation that I think can help people to understand the world that they live in. Actually, just on Counterfire, I mean, one of the things that excited me most about Counterfire is a couple of things, actually, a couple of examples, is actually Mitra's story about going back to Afghanistan, which I thought was it was a very personal experience, but it spoke absolute volumes about the situation in Afghanistan, about the terrible conditions that have been created, for the people, particularly for women, by the occupation. But it was a personal testimony, and it had a huge amount of power. And of course, as well as being well written and everything, but I mean, it did. It went very, very quickly. It got a lot of readership for that. Another example was we got unsolicited. I think we got a report from a social worker in Tyneside who had clearly just reached the end of their tether in terms of what was happening to the service that they were involved in. They sent in an anonymous report because they were worried about being victimised or whatever. But it spoke absolute volumes about the state of Britain and the state of the society. When we want to have as many of those kind of reports as we can, and I tell you, it's not automatic that we get them. And one of the things that I think we should all see ourselves as citizens journalists is as commissioners, as people who are looking for other people who are persuading other people to actually write and to give us their experiences. Because under this society, working class people are taught their opinions don't matter, are taught that they shouldn't really think for themselves, they shouldn't express themselves. And Counterfire is the exact opposite of that. We want Counterfire to be an expression of that experience, and that means we have to go and talk to people. Sometimes we have to write, do interviews with them to encourage them to write or show them how to write, and all those things. That's important. My last point is point number 3, which is I think that ideas need to be linked to organisation, and in fact, in reality, ideas always are linked to organisation. Our adversaries, our enemies know this. Take the example of Rupert Murdoch, obvious but nevertheless telling. Rupert Murdoch has created in his lifetime an enormous global organisation that has tentacles in every aspect of society, in countries around the world, that is, as we've discovered, if we didn't already know, deeply embedded in the British state, etc., etc., which means it gives him a huge advantage in all sorts of different ways. Now, we can't exactly replicate that operation because we're on the opposite side, but what we can do is we can link ourselves to, as journalists, as writers, as reporters, as citizen journalists, link ourselves to an organisation of like-minded people who actually also are committed to changing the world. And I think this is absolutely crucial. Actually, a lot of the best, I mean, again, flying in the face of the common sense view about journalism, a lot of the best reportage historically has been by people who are involved in struggle. You think of George Orwell in Spain, John Reed in revolutionary Russia in 1917. I mean, there's a huge and very, very important history of reportage which comes from activism, which is linked into activism, and that's the kind of thing that we're looking for. Without an organisation, we won't be able to disseminate the things that we write and the things that we film. Literally, in a very practical way, we all know Facebook sharing, tweeting out matters. And in order to get a profile for subversive ideas, when you don't have platforms like the BBC or the Guardian, you actually have to have our own platform, which is a platform of activists who are prepared and ready to hand out leaflets, to give out newspapers, to argue with people, and to share on Facebook. And that's really, without that network, the ideas won't go anywhere. There's another side to it as well, which is, in the end of the day, we also have to be fighting to implement the ideas that we're talking about, because really the credibility of radical socialist ideas, in the end of the day, falls on whether they're ideas that can clearly, practically be seen to help to change the world. And in order to prove that, in a way, we need to implement them as well as just spreading them. Thanks very much.